Dante Alighieri spent years writing the Divine Comedy. In it, he described hell with precision, he described purgatory, and he also described the 9 heavens that Beatrice led him through, one by one. But when he finally reached the Empyrean, the highest point in all of creation, the place where God dwells, Dante was unable to put into words what he saw. He himself said that human language was not enough to describe what he had witnessed, that even his own memory had failed before the magnitude of what he had contemplated. And yet, 500 years later, Gustave Doré opened that poem, reached that same point, and decided to draw it. And what this man created is, without question, one of the most beautiful images we have ever seen. In this image, we see 2 small figures, almost tiny, standing at the edge of something that has no name. Their silhouettes are black, completely dark, with no features, no expression, nothing that allows us to identify them. They are simply 2 human shadows standing before a giant circle formed by angels. Those 2 figures are Dante and Beatrice, and from where they stand, the image opens upward in a spiral that seems to have no end. Thousands of figures, angels, and blessed souls rotate in concentric formations around a center that radiates light. Gustave Doré, the genius behind this illustration, is considered one of the most talented artists in the history of art. At just 15 years old, he had already signed a contract with a Parisian publisher, and by 25, he had become the highest paid illustrator in France. This man never studied at the École des Beaux-Arts, nor did he ever receive any formal academic training, but what he had was something no school can teach: the ability to illustrate stories in an extraordinary way from a written text. Hell, the flood, war, the most extreme passages of the Bible. All of this fascinated Doré from a very young age, so much so that when he died in 1883 at the age of 51, he had produced more than 100,000 illustrations. The story of how Doré came to illustrate the Divine Comedy says a great deal about who he was. At 23 years old, he decided he wanted to create an illustrated edition of Dante's poem. He proposed the idea to his publisher, Louis Hachette, who rejected the project, as the format Doré had in mind was too large and too costly. But this did nothing to stop Doré's desire to take on the challenge, and so he paid the publishing costs out of his own pocket. When the illustrated Inferno was released to the public in 1861, it sold out within weeks and became a massive commercial success. Hachette, who had initially turned down the proposal, sent him a telegram that read, literally, "Success, come quickly." Purgatory and Paradise were the next books to be published in 1868, and since then, Doré's edition has appeared in hundreds of different versions, to the point where today it is impossible to think of the Divine Comedy without thinking of his images. For millions of readers around the world, the voice of Dante and the illustrations of Doré are inseparable. Now, returning to the image of the Empyrean, you may be wondering what this place is and where it came from. One thing to keep in mind is that in the cosmology of Dante's poem, the universe is ordered in concentric spheres. The Earth sits at the center, and surrounding it are the planetary heavens: the Moon, Mercury, Venus, the Sun, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Then comes the heaven of the fixed stars, and finally the primum mobile, the sphere that transmits the movement of God to all the others. But beyond all of that, with no physical location, no time, and no space of any kind, lies the Empyrean. This is not a place in the conventional sense. It might be easier to understand it as the mind of God, the dwelling place of angels and the souls of the righteous in their final form, the origin of all the light and all the movement that exists in the universe. The poem tells us that when Dante arrived there, the first thing he saw was a river of light. That river transformed into a circle, and that circle then became an immense white rose with thousands of tears of souls arranged across its petals, and at the center of that rose, a light so intense that human vision is unable to hold its gaze. Although this painting may seem faithful to Dante's description, there is one decision in this image that changes everything, and it is easy to overlook if you are not looking carefully. Doré could have placed Dante and Beatrice anywhere in the composition. He could have positioned them at the center, surrounded by angels. He could have shown them facing forward, their faces visible and their expressions full of wonder. Instead, he placed them at the bottom, small, with no distinguishable features, painted as shadows. That decision is not decorative. It is the conceptual statement of the entire work. The moment we turn the two observers into silhouettes facing away from us, we empty them of all individual identity. They stop being Dante and Beatrice, and they become us. But there is a problem that Gustave Doré had to face when creating this image, and it is, in my opinion, what makes it a masterpiece. Dante himself said he was unable to describe what he saw in the Empyrean. There was no language adequate enough to describe it, so if the man who witnessed it was unable to put it into words, how was an illustrator supposed to draw it 500 years later? That was the challenge Doré had to face, and the way he solved it is what separates this image from everything else. But before we continue, I want to remind you that if you would like to have this work in your collection, you can now purchase it from our website. In the link in the description, you will find our catalogue with many more works by Gustave Doré and other artists, so you can begin your own art collection and turn your home into your own personal museum. Shipping is free worldwide, and by purchasing from the store, you will be supporting me enormously in continuing to create videos like this every week. Now, let's continue. Rather than inventing a vision of God from scratch, as Renaissance painters had done before him, Doré went back to the one clue Dante had left behind: the rose. In medieval Christian tradition, the rose was one of the most loaded symbols that existed. It was the emblem of the Virgin Mary, the flower associated with divine love, with purity, and with perfection. A rose has a center from which everything radiates outward in perfectly organized layers, with hierarchy and order, forming a single point of origin that governs everything. And scholars have pointed out that Dante likely had in mind the rose windows of Gothic cathedrals when he chose that image. Those circular stained glass windows that project light into the interior of churches, organized in concentric rings around a luminous center. Dante had seen those windows in the basilicas of his time, and in the Empyrean he built an infinite version of that same design. Doré understood this metaphor, and what he did was take that single clue and follow it to its absolute limit. The rose in this image is not a recognizable flower. It is a pattern that repeats infinitely toward a center the eye cannot reach. The more you look inward, the less you can see. The presence of God in this image is precisely what cannot be drawn, the point where everything disappears into white. That is why I say this image was never supposed to exist. Dante could not describe it, but Doré found a way to show it, and that is why this image, painted 500 years after the poem was written, still feels like the only honest answer to the experience Dante lived in that moment. Thank you for watching the video until the end. As always, I would love to read your thoughts on this painting in the comments. Thank you for your support, and I will see you in the next video.